This is round 13 of the 2021 season, and the Eagles have just sunk Richmond thanks to a heroic last-minute goal from Josh Kennedy. You see the idiotic boob on the screen there who thinks the Eagles are destined to go on and win the flag? Yep, that's me. And the reason I'm showing you this moment in time is because this was pretty much the last moment it felt good to be an Eagles fan. But to appreciate this story fully, we need to rewind all the way back to this moment.
Massive shade from the boundary.
Now, you're probably wondering why we needed to go back to the Eagles' premiership win in 2018 to set the scene for this story. To be honest, we didn't. I just wanted to work that part into the video somehow. Buckle up, people. This is going to be one depressing trip down memory lane. As defending champions, the 2019 season started decently enough. It started with a bad loss to the Brisbane Lions at the Gabba, but they proved to be a top 2 side by the end of the home and away season. By the middle of the year, the Eagles would nudge their way back into the top 4 and stay there for most of the regular season. That is until, of course, they got inexplicably belted in the final round at home to the Hawks and missed out on a double chance going into the finals. Now, during that final series, Willie Rioli would get charged with substituting his urine for Gatorade during a routine drug test. Much a furore was made of this so-called big event, but in my personal opinion, I suspect the whole saga was a misunderstanding. Rioli was clearly holding a cup of urine and a cup of Gatorade at the same time, and by mistake, submitted the Gatorade for testing while taking a big swig out of the cup of urine. Honestly, if that's a crime, lock me up and throw away the key. But Rioli would eventually be given a 2-year ban for this offence. Now, there could be a temptation to reflect on this moment as the point in time where it all started going wrong for the Eagles. But that would be a bit revisionist when you consider Naitanui 2 ACLs and Gaff hitting Brayshaw in the Western Derby. But it was a devastating blow to fan morale, and things definitely started to move downhill from that point. A semi-final exit that year seemed destined after the final round loss, and that's what we got. But the Eagles would be proactive in that trade period to improve the list, trading a king's ransom for Geelong star Tim Kelly and giving the midfield a much-needed facelift. Now, I'm not going to use this video as a platform to criticise the decision to trade away 2 first-round and 2 second-round picks for a gun player in his prime, but there's no doubt the lack of access to top draft talent would have some degree of impact on where the club would find itself just 2 years later. But with the shiny new Tim Kelly and renewed pre-season optimism, many an Eagles fan had already restored their belief that 2020 would be the year that everything would go back to normal and the Eagles would be a legitimate flag contender. Nope. Global pandemic hits. Football is not only delayed for months, but the new reformatted season causes players across the league to make big sacrifices to make the league work. The Eagles, like many sides, will be forced to spend the first part of the year hubbing on the Gold Coast in a desperate bid to minimise interstate travel and ensure the 2020 season would still go ahead. Now, much was said in the media about the Eagles during this hubbing experience. There was rumours of discontent, bad attitudes, and a general dropping of player standards during their time on the Gold Coast. Like most things, I would suggest that a lot of what was actually being reported about the Eagles in the Queensland hub was probably a little bit sensationalist, but I have no doubt that the players weren't in the right mindset while they were away. And given the age profile of the list, with many young fathers in that team, I can empathise with that to an extent. However, the results that followed were exceptionally disappointing. The Eagles would get annihilated by the Wooden Spooners in Gold Coast in round 2, before big losses to Brisbane and Port Adelaide followed. The Eagles looked a long way off being AFL ready, and in a shortened season, these losses would ultimately prove costly to their hopes of flag contention. They did rally during the middle of the year, but couldn't quite make up the ground on the best teams in the competition. In the end, they'd fall 1 win short of the top 4, an outcome pretty similar to the previous season. They'd be knocked out in dramatic fashion in a home elimination final against Collingwood, and while it was hard to watch, I think deep down most Eagles fans accepted we'd simply paid the price for an inconsistent season. But it was all okay, because 2021 was going to be better, right? Guys? Hey guys, sorry, I'm just going to interrupt this video very briefly to let you know that this video is made in a paid partnership with BetterHelp. So look, this is primarily a footy channel. We talk about footy 99% of the time, but you may have noticed that in times, particularly over the podcast, I open up a little bit about concepts like mental health. I've made a video talking about how my 20s were, dealing with a lot of mental obstacles, dealing with grief, dealing with rejection. And that is why I'm really proud and happy to say that I can finally link you guys with a service that will help you really invest in your own mental health. So essentially, BetterHelp connects you to a credentialed therapist who is trained to listen and give you some helpful, unbiased advice. Starting therapy can be hard. I mean, in some cases, the right therapist might not necessarily be in your area, or you might find the face-to-face interaction side of things difficult. The cool thing about BetterHelp is that you can choose to have your sessions as a phone call, as a video chat, or if you prefer, even messaging. So to get started on this, you can click the link below in the description and in the pinned comment. You fill out a questionnaire to assess your specific needs, and in most cases, you'll get matched with a therapist within 48 hours. The cool thing about BetterHelp is if you feel that you aren't a right fit with that particular therapist, you can switch to another one at no additional cost. So guys, if you think you could benefit from therapy, consider BetterHelp, and you can do that by visiting the link in the description of this video, or you can simply go to betterhelp.com/truefooty. Clicking that link will obviously help support the channel, but also it will get you 10% off your first month with BetterHelp, so you can connect with a therapist and see if it helps you. Anyway, thank you guys, let's get back to the video. It would start off in okay fashion, with the Eagles claiming a 2-1 start off the back of an impressive win over the Power, who had finished on top the previous year. But in round 4, the Eagles would put in a performance so bad against St Kilda that one mustachioed Eagles fan was forced to drop 5,000 F-bombs in front of a live audience. So this game has taken a disgusting turn. In 2021, we would be even more inconsistent, with the wins seeming pretty par for the course, while the losses started to get bad. I mean, really bad. At this point in time, I think it was clear change was needed. Personally, I remember feeling that it was not a personnel issue, but more so a game style issue. The Eagles had become timid and conservative with their ball movement, and a real lack of confidence and work rate had become a problem for all to see. We're so determined to sort of maintain our defensive shape. We're not attacking with the ball like we used to. Yeah. The win over Richmond was sandwiched into the middle of the season, betwixt some of these horrific losses. And while in hindsight the win seems insignificant, the fight back the Eagles showed in the dying stages against the reigning premiers in that game gave fans both incredible joy and genuine faith. But that joy would be short-lived, with huge losses to the Dogs at home and Sydney in Geelong to follow shortly after. Incredibly, the Eagles stayed 7th on the ladder until round 22 of that season, despite a huge drop-off in performance. That was the round Fremantle snapped an 11 derby losing streak to symbolise a bit of a changing of the guard in Western Australian football. That loss would dump the Eagles out of the finals race, and in reality, a 9th place finish was flattering of a team that had become visibly jaded. The 2021 off-season was a productive one, with the Eagles taking just their 3rd first-round draft pick in 7 seasons. They added Campbell Chesser, Brady Hoff, Rhett Bazzo, and Jack Williams in a promising start to what loomed as a lengthy list restructure. With an injection of talented youth and a full and productive pre-season spent tweaking the game plan to become more assertive and decisive than in previous seasons, the pre-season optimism was back for most fans. And while there was a clear need for a transitioning of the list from aging stars to talented youth, the list the Eagles took into the 2022 season still had the talent profile of a side that should have been aiming to play finals. But what would happen to the Eagles during that pre-season and the early stages of the season itself was absolutely absurd. Campbell Chesser and Dom Sheed suffered ankle injuries in a practice match against Fremantle, shortly after Tom Cole had done a similar injury at training that week. Elliot Yeo also injured his calf in that game. Tom Joyce was then signed as a supplementary list player to support the Eagles during their injury crisis, only to then also bust his ankle in severe fashion. Between all those players I just listed, they would play a combined 6 games of AFL that year, and 5 of those were from Yeo himself. I literally do not have time to summarise all of the injuries the Eagles sustained early in that season. But let's just say that the injury list the Eagles took into round 1 against the Gold Coast that year was 15 names long. Oh, and don't forget COVID isolations were a thing back then too, so you can add 3 extra names to make that 18 players. It got worse in round 2, with the Eagles literally being unable to field a team of 22 players. They would be forced to take 5 waffle top-up players on their trip to play North Melbourne. And as a result, they would be forced to forfeit a waffle match against East Fremantle as they simply did not have enough players to fill a team. Now the 2022 season went on a bit like that for a little while, with the Eagles being the only side having to dip into their backup play list, which they did on a second occasion in round 8. There was some joy, however, with the Eagles somehow knocking off Collingwood in round 4 of that season at Marvel Stadium. The Pies would end up losing a prelim by 1 point that year, and this remains one of the hardest Eagles victories to explain that I've ever witnessed. But whilst the insane injury list the Eagles had was a pretty legitimate excuse for their form, we did see some really worrying signs too. When some of the Eagles' injured stars returned to their side as reinforcements, the performances seemed to get worse. Now, this sort of occurrence is multifactorial. For a start, those players were likely underdone, they hadn't been able to play together as a team to build synergy, and their overall confidence was clearly at rock bottom. That being said, the enormous losses against the Power, the Tigers, the Lions and the Demons got increasingly alarming. It got to the point where a 52-point loss to the Giants in Sydney had been our best performance in over a month. The performances got a little better in the second half of the year, and the Eagles would avoid the wooden spoon with a 2-win season. We said goodbye to JK and Redden, and we would take pick 2 to the national draft to finally get access to top-tier talent. All in all though, I remember saying at the time it felt like we didn't get anything out of the 2022 season, given the injuries to some of our few talented young players. As you probably remember, the Eagles split pick 2 and took local midfield guns Ruben Jinby and Elijah Hewitt, and also nabbing young gun Noah Long with one of the last picks in that draft. They also signed Jaden Hunt as a free agent in a move that looked odd at the time, but would ultimately pay off. So it was a productive off-season, and I went into the 2023 season figuring that with a better injury run and some talented youth to sprinkle into the side, we would surprise a few people this year. I was wrong. The start of 2023, in hindsight, was actually pretty promising. While the Eagles went down to the Wooden Spooners in North, the quality of that game didn't really forecast how 2023 was going to go for either of those sides. The Eagles were clearly playing a style that was more attacking and drove the football from back half to front half a lot more effectively. We took that form into round 2 against the Giants and we even claimed a win. To this point in time, it appeared the Eagles had shaken off the dreaded injury curse from 2022. I was again wrong. The derby in round 3 against Fremantle was a weird one. And by weird, I mean horrific. The Eagles would sustain 7 injuries in that game. Cripps broke his ankle and missed 3 months, Ryan and McGovern would both tear hamstrings, Ryan would be out for the year while Gov would miss 4 months himself, Shuey would miss 2 months with a hammy and Chesser would miss a similar amount with a knee injury. The Eagles fought bravely to almost win that game, but this would effectively ruin our season as it was just getting started. I don't need to list absolutely all of them for you, but the length of the injury list that year grew by about 2 players a week, and by about round 8, it was just as long as last year with only a handful of players outside the selected 22 fit at any one time. But once again, while the injuries were crippling, the losses started to get worse than in 2022, and to be honest, it got to a point where it was beyond forgivable. It started with a 116-point loss against the bottom side in Hawthorn in Tasmania, in a game where we only scored 26 points. You would hope this would be the low point of the season, but sadly it probably just cracks the top 3. The Eagles would sustain 5 losses by over 100 points in 2023. Once against Hawthorn, once against Adelaide, twice against Carlton, and shamefully, once against Fremantle in a home Western Derby. But, bizarrely, all of these pale in comparison to the 171-point drubbing we received against the Swans at the SCG in a game where we conceded 205 points. So, the Eagles had officially become the laughingstock of the AFL. Actually, it was worse than that, with most opposition fans at that point almost becoming sympathetic at how bad our side had become in a 24-month time frame. It would take the Eagles more than 2 years and 52 games from the point of Josh Kennedy sinking Richmond at Optus Stadium to win 4 games of AFL football. Now, we've been fairly heavy on the bad stuff that's happened for West Coast in this video, so I'm relieved to say that things got a little bit better towards the end of the season. In the last 5 games of the season, the Eagles actually put together some respectable football. They'd have wins over the Roos and, shockingly, the Bulldogs in that stretch. They get within a point of the Bombers at Marvel and put in a respectable fight against the Crows in the final game of the season at Optus Stadium. If you ignore the shameful 101-point derby loss sandwiched in between those games, that run of form should give Eagles fans some hope. And you know what? I am going to ignore it. It totally did not happen. So the Eagles finished the 2023 season with a glimmer of optimism, along with the club's second ever wooden spoon. But the upshot of being this deplorably bad has been that the Eagles can get genuinely excited about some of the talent they've added to their list in recent times. Now, like I said, this video would be a tough watch for Eagles fans, and it's probably been a little bit depressing. But I'm going to choose to end this video on a higher note. Things this year have gotten as bad as they possibly can get for a football club, but I truly believe the Eagles will return to being a strong force of the competition again someday. After all, this is not the first time the club has been brought to its knees. If you're old enough to remember 2008, you'll remember the disastrous fallout of the Cousins and Judd exits had on this football club. And if you told anyone then that the Eagles would be back in the top 4 2 seasons after 2008, you'd have been laughed at. Now, I'm not going to make any claims that the Eagles were going to shoot back into the top 4 anytime soon, nor am I even going to suggest we'll be close to the finals for a few years. But there is a genuine trend in the AFL of big successful clubs not staying down for too long when shit hits the fan. The Crows are back after their off-season camp saga, the Pies dipped down for a year after Treloar Gate, and both clubs have put those events distantly in the rearview mirror. My belief is that the Eagles will return to being that powerful force they are generally known for being. It just might take a little bit longer to get there this time. Now, I focused heavily on the injury issues when covering the last 2 years in this video, and hopefully opposition fans can appreciate just how bad the adversity got for the Eagles in that time frame. That being said, I do not believe the injuries were the sole reason for this drop-off, and have been consistent in saying that for years on this channel. The rot for the Eagles began during the middle of 2021, it's just that the injuries haven't allowed us a full chance of really trying to fix our issues. What 2024 holds for West Coast, I honestly have no idea. But I'm willing to be patient, and I'm already excited for round 1. I don't know about you guys, but I can't wait to see our young midfield of Ginbey, Hewitt and Reid dominate for years to come. Once they mature, of course. Anyway, thanks for indulging in this video, guys. I really enjoy this style of content, and I hope you do as well. Sadly, these types of videos do get demonetized for the use of music, so I'm doing this as more of a passion project. But if you enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate you helping me out by liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and even recommending it to a friend. For now, I'll say goodbye and see you in the next video. Cheers.